So right now we're an hour before opening night. Everybody's sort of done their rehearsals, lights, sound. William has done his checks, I've done my checks. How am I feeling? Nervous, but excited. It's kind of really great for it to sort of just about to happen, no?
Enjoy the show.
I think it is very true that you can take the artist out of Africa, but that you cannot take Africa out of the artist. I've experienced that myself. I'm Elena Patterson, and I am in the Northern Catskill Mountains in Tannersville, New York. I grew up in Franschhoek in South Africa. Before it was a fancy town. It was a wonderful place to grow up. It was a very rural community. We had to entertain ourselves, and I'm really grateful that those were my circumstances. There were some weird obstacles in my education. I could never take art. And I remember being advised that maybe I should do domestic science, and I was desperate. I wept. And my mother finally said, oh, okay then, do art.
My name is Thuthuka. I'm a composer and musical director. My grandmother sort of raised me, and in Zulu, they used to call me Iqanda la Granny, which is granny's egg. And I think it's always been that feeling of being cushioned by this absolute support and love. My childhood, if anything, I would say was Pietermaritzburg. I thought it was the biggest and craziest place in the world. And then I went back recently and I was kind of just like, what was I thinking? So I went to the Drakensberg Boys Choir School when I was a little pup. And essentially that was the beginning of sort of, my musical journey. If I look back and I sort of think about what could have been most challenging, it was losing my grandmother. I think, to go back to this thing of being held and supported by somebody so close and so dear to me. There's something about the carpet being ripped off from beneath you without you sort of being ready for the fall.
My dad died when I was in my senior year, and we moved to Stellenbosch from Franschhoek at that point. I chose Stellenbosch University because we lived there, and I was a PSO student. I never actually considered any other university.
The day I sort of went to my first class was the first time I actually went to the university itself. Once I got there, I sort of never looked back. There's a beauty in the family that was built in the conserve at Stellenbosch, and there was an education that wasn't just only in the classroom, but outside as well. I think sometimes we speak of Stellenbosch as this weird bubble that is impenetrable. There's something about that bubble that is very penetrating, and there's sort of like invigorated questioning. The trumpets. I don't know, call it serendipity. But Philip Miller called me up and he said, what are you doing? I'm moving to Cape Town. I was like, oh my God, I have no job and I just graduated. What do you need? And that was the beginning of sort of like this beautiful relationship that sort of then has opened up this world that I'm sort of like inhabiting right now. Chorus go.
Leaving was one of the most difficult things that I have ever done. It was really sad. We really did not want to go. When we first arrived in the US, obviously, it was a huge culture shock. Huge. We had no references that we could share with people. There was no basis that we shared whatsoever. We were African.
Being in New York was life-changing. I've known about Juilliard since I was a child. It's one of those institutes that you hear about in movies. I remember the first day I was walking across the zebra crossing that opens up just to their door. And there's a feeling, I think I looked up and I was kind of like, is this really happening? And you open the door and whatever happens within those doors doesn't really matter. It's the fact that you're breathing the same air as some of the greatest artists that come out of New York, It was thrillingly awakening.
I happen to love color. I decided I wanted to start painting. So I went to the Art Students League and took abstract art. And then I started drawing on the walls, and that was fun. This house is our house, and this is where we live, and my poor family had to just put up with it. Very much African influence in our house. The color itself comes from Africa. And find things that we love in Africa and bring it home, and I think it must reflect homesickness. People had come up the driveway to look at this house from all over. Somebody did an article in the New York Times, and that's when it really went crazy. At that point, the town was in a shambles, really. People were leaving. It was becoming sort of a ghost town. There was no money to restore anything, and something had to be done. The mayor told me that there was a foundation called the Hunter Foundation that had just been awarded a government grant to revamp the facades of the buildings along Main Street. And he also suggested that I talk to the building owners along Main Street, which I did.
She came into the town and she said, how about if 50% of the people said, what a great idea, we'll do this. And 50% of the people said, nah, no one's gonna tell me what to do. And she painted one place after the next, and the place just got more and more beautiful.
Our Mike Leonard visited a small town in upstate New York that went from drab to dazzling with a little imagination and a few paintbrushes.
People are actually moving back here now.
Every store is filled now because they all want to rent them, so our economy, it's the best thing that ever happened, I feel.
The refurbishment was a basic component of the paint project. If there was any rotten wood, any water problems, all of those things had to be eliminated before we started the paint. And so the shutters tell you there's a locksmith, electrician, and a liquor store. That's clothing spinning around in a washing machine and soap bubbles.
Through her expertise and creativity, she's allowed the world to come into Tannersville and created an element of global sophistication that we were never able to create on our own without her.
My little idea was so minor compared to what it has become. It's been so many people have been involved in this project and have banded together to make the town work. I do think Africa played, in my particular case, played a huge role in the use of color. I can't separate myself from color, and I can't separate myself from the African background.
I would say if I had to ask myself what would be the dream for the continent, for my work, I would say to find a place in the world. So we are now at the Tate Modern, and tonight is the opening night for a project which we've been working on for the last 2 years, looking at the involvement of African soldiers during World War I. William, Philip, and I, Gregory Makoma, and a team that expands into Belgium, into Germany, into Australia has been sort of working on this for the last 2 years, and we finally sort of made it to the Tate. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going straight from recruitment into procession to war. I'd like to think it's sort of like a hybrid performance because it's a mixture of dance, a mixture of sculpture, video, music, text, drama, and and then there's just the staging itself, the scope and the size of the stage.
For every soldier, 3 carriers. For every cannon, 300 carriers. When a man dies, a man remains. When 100 dies, 100 remain. When 1,000 die, 1,000 carry the boat to the lake.
For World War I to be written about in the way that it's been written and not consider the perspective of the Chinese or the Indians or Africans is a bizarre fact. And so with this work, I think it's really trying to revisit that. And I think there's something about understanding what was happening in Africa at the same time. And so trying to turn that upside down, where Europe is now at the bottom and Africa is at the top, and using a musical language to sort of find a means of understanding the relationship between the two continents. There's also the theme of sort of what is the paradox of Black African soldiers fighting against each other for a war that was never their own, you know? And so I think a story like this coming from Africa being told by Africans is important in that we are then the authors of whatever is taken by the rest of the world. Meeting the rector of Stellenbosch University is quite a thrilling thing. I think he'll be really proud.
Right now, I feel good. I feel good about what's about to go on stage, but nervous. But a good nervous, like a happy butterfly nervous.
Ash does not save ash. Bulungu. Bulungu.
Stop! Why should I hesitate? I must go and die for my king and my country. Why should I go? Ibrahim committed suicide. Omar Kebe, Moma Masa, Ganambaye, Masasa, Transvaal Masilo, Dembaso.
Thank you for coming. This is amazing.
It's an honor, absolute honor. Yeah. And to think that you're a mod, you know.
We everywhere.
I think there's something about your alma mater sort of looking at you and being like, actually, hey, you did good, you know?
My entire life has been based on my schooling. Being a Māori has been a lifelong presence in my life.
It is a feeling of home. It's to know what a true gift feels like. It feels right.